Hello, one and all, and welcome to another edition of Heavy Hands. I am your host, Connor Rebush. With me, as always, is Phil McKenzie. Phil, how you doing?
Not too bad. Winter has really hit the UK finally. Pretty mild one, but surviving. And we're now fully into the UFC schedule for the year. I think last week was kind of a warm-up, and now we've got the first big card to pay attention to.
Yeah, just for the sake of our sanity and morale, I'm going to go ahead and say right here at the top, let's not do what Zane and I did on the Vivi last week and look too closely at this undercard or ahead at the next 2 months of UFC cards. Let's pretend that all is well and that there is lots and lots to care about. There's enough for an episode, right? We're clear on that. Ngannou gone. Fantastically interesting fight. Probably one of the best heavyweight title fights, top echelon of heavyweight title fights for quite some time. Moreno, Figuerado, and whatever, but on the off chance that Figuerado isn't as suddenly past it or out of it as he appeared in the last fight, I'm still interested to see that. And of course, Brandon Moreno is a blast to watch no matter what. So that's cool. And then we had Kattar Chikadze last weekend, which A, was fucking awesome and brutally violent, and B, will give you a chance to gloat, which I will be very happy to sit back and listen to, because I don't exactly like Chikadze either, and I'm always happy when a fighter isn't done after a brutal beating, as I feared. So those three fights will comprise more or less the entirety of our episode today, and hopefully knowing that he has a good sustained gloat coming in segment 3 will give Phil the energy to fill me in on the basics of Francis Ngannou versus Ciryl Gane. Do you agree? Are you that this is a superbly compelling heavyweight fight?
Yeah, in a way that we really don't get very often.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is as close as you're going to get to sterling yarn for the heavyweight division.
Pretty much.
Two quite divergent styles. Two relatively young heavyweights, undeniably in the prime of their careers.
Yeah.
Both of which have looked, extremely impressive lately.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's really one of those ones where you can make a case for either fighter, and there's no doubt that we're seeing just two fighters at their absolute peak. And it was the JDS Kane of its time.
Pretty much, which means we can look forward to rematches 2, 3, 4, and 6. They're going to skip 5. I heard. It's inside information on that. There's also the fact that that style clash, which is so pronounced for a nominally striker versus striker battle, as you said, more than we ever really get at heavyweight. That comes with the fact that if Ciryl Gane wins, it will represent an unprecedented paradigm shift for the UFC heavyweight division. A heavyweight who can routinely win fights without barreling forward and knocking people out with one punch. There's never been a champion like that. Stipe Miocic comes the closest, and he pretty much stopped doing it after winning the title, and mostly became a lot more of a slugger. Although, granted, hey, his win over Ngannou was the most like a sort of Gane-style fight we've seen, with just a lot more wrestling. So yeah, Gane is he's a breath of incredibly fresh air by heavyweight championship fight standards. And Francis Ngannou is the most terrifying iteration of your classic heavyweight who does what heavyweights are supposed to do, i.e. blasting people's head off.
Yeah, that's the really interesting thing about Garn, isn't it? You don't know whether he he's someone who's hacked the approach of the division.
Right.
No, if we're talking about him like he's Khabib Nurmagomedov, and everyone's just going to be like, "What? You can do that?"
Yeah.
Or whether he's going to be someone where he just has a bunch of success up to a certain level, and then suddenly there's just a clanging door shut on his level of success. Just like, oh yeah, this is primed to take you so far and no further.
Which was, frankly, kind of the case, to go back to your earlier comparison, kind of the case with Junior Dos Santos. It's like, granted, Cain Velasquez himself, not exactly your typical heavyweight by any stretch, but JDS really had a similar sort of niche as this quick, long-range sniping striker. And, at a certain point in heavyweight, it always seems to be the case that, like, meatheads who knock you out will just reign supreme at the end of the day. Tell me about Gane as an opponent for Ngannou. I think we have seen remarkable consistency out of Gane's performances, which makes it, I think, quite a bit easier to know exactly what to expect from him in this fight. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, so we've seen basically a shockingly consistent, fairly limited, honestly, but like, is limited the right word? Maybe focused, if you'd like a less sort of negative take on it.
Sure.
Sort of pressure point scoring fighter who kind of herds people behind the jab, gets out behind it, and has basically just like mostly an educated jab and kick. Who then gets out of the way of return fire. And obviously the interest for this is that with the exception of the fact that they used to train together, Ngannou's never really had to deal with anything like that, with the weird and probably not particularly illustrative exception of like Derek Lewis.
Notable for his quick feet and educated jab.
I mean, he was someone who enforced a singular range and just sat there and did like one or two things.
Though he enforced
in terms
it
of, like,
he enforced it with Ngannou's help.
Yeah.
Which I guess
it's not the most, like, if that's your most illustrative comparison for Cyril Gane,
right?
We're quickly getting into the you have never fought anyone even remotely like this kind of category.
Yeah. Otherwise, you've got, like, again in spots, maybe Stipe, who was a guy who could like sling quick straight punches, but Ngannou made terrible decisions early in that fight, or at least a terribly ineffective gambit. And then otherwise, maybe JDS, who was frankly only meaningful as a slightly less older, slightly less shot version of JDS than the one Gane would fight not long after. And, I think fragility and tendency to implode when his back touches the fence. We don't know if fragility does not appear to be the case with Gane. He also does not appear to implode quite so quickly when his back is put to the fence, although that's not 100% certain, and Ngannou could be the guy to make Gane, the first guy to make Gane look really bad off the back foot. I think there's still a distinct possibility of that. How funny will it be, Phil, if Ngannou just runs out like he did against Rosenstrike and just nukes Gane with the ugliest flurry of punches you've ever seen?
I mean, this happening at some point in the fight is, right, I think, one of the bigger possibilities in this.
Yeah.
Because, Gane really does have a lot of tall man defense, i.e. running backwards. He does, put his hands up. He's at least not JDS or, for that matter, Giga Chikadze.
No.
But he does just tend to run backwards in a straight line and wait until he's back at the range where he can be pecking at people
that
again.
Fantastic jab, as is so often the case for MMA fighters, doesn't really exist as a defensive tool the way you would like it to.
But I think the Rosenstruik fight is an interesting, or at least the Rosenstruik example is interesting because really it gets to the core, I think, of why Ngannou is particularly dangerous in this fight. I've seen someone on Twitter was saying, that they think that Ngannou's strength isn't so much, his power, but it's his speed. When it comes down to it, I'm not even sure if it's really that, or at least in the terms of because there's really three things that make Ngannou work as a fighter. Yes, he's fast. Yes, he is powerful, but it's also that he's very durable.
Yeah,
because Rosenstruik obviously counters him in the middle of that gigantic rush.
Yeah.
And it does absolutely nothing.
Right. And Miocic, both in the first fight, hit him a lot. And Ngannou was still, even a dead, tired Ngannou was still delivering just this side of not devastating knockout punches late into that fight. And in their second fight, moments before the KO, the reason Miocic threw himself into the counter left hook, which is a punch that could prove particularly effective against Gane. We'll get into that more later, Ngannou's counterpunching. But the reason Miocic threw himself into the fight-ending sequence was that he thought he had nailed Ngannou, and it just did nothing.
He has one of those chins where he just seems to be able to, at least some extent, ignore return fire.
Yeah.
It makes him uncomfortable, but it rarely seems to hurt him.
Yeah.
And if you're going to be chasing someone, that is really what you want.
He's got the neck and therefore the chin that you would expect Alistair Overeem to have. He just seems to not, punches just seem to not even move his head when they land. Yeah.
Because I think that otherwise, I think Gane is going to be immensely troubling for him.
Yeah.
I sort of said this. I think I said this around the Volkov fight. I basically said before we picked the Volkov fight, I was like, I don't think Gane is going to be able to hold up to Volkov's pace and so on. But if he wins in a consistent manner, I'm going to pick him over everyone.
Sure.
In some ways, I'm sort of gonna hold to that.
All right. It's your funeral, buddy.
Because I still think that Ngannou is someone. I'm still not sure whether he's really figured out what kind of fighter he is.
Right.
I know that he had the dreadful performance against Lewis, but and other than that has just been an absolute force of nature. I think that is at least partially an element of everyone he's fought being either not very good or old.
They're all heavyweights.
Yeah.
And against Miocic, which I do still think was a really impressive, solid performance. There's not a whole lot to critique Ngannou on in that entire fight, or at least almost 6 minutes of it. But, in that fight, he had the benefit of having fought Miocic before, being able to learn from past mistakes, and really kind of was effective with the same things that were effective the first time, except that he had, it was still Ngannou pressuring Miocic towards the fence.
But that's the thing. A lot of it wasn't that. And that's, I think, really...
He just did it more in spots, and he had also clearly shored up his wrestling quite a bit.
Yeah. I think a lot of it was really counterpunching.
Sure. It always is.
And that's the thing, is I don't know how much Ngannou has gears between we're going to have a mid-range kickboxing match, and he's simply gotten better at enforcing that range. Mid-range kickboxing match where I'm going to counterpunch. And so pretty much everyone he's fought It's just been like, oh my god, he's standing right in front of me. I need to get him out of there and kill him, and then have just gotten their heads torn off.
Yep.
He does either that, or he just bum rushes people.
Well, the bum rushes against Miocic, I'll give him this credit, were certainly the best, most calculated rushes we've seen from Ngannou to date. But I mean, also they were ones where he was like, he was winning the striking exchanges before he charged him. Yeah, there were really no moments in which Miocic was bothering him or making him uncomfortable or threatened. But he had one was a nice 1-1-2, which is probably one of the very few 3-punch combinations Miocic or Ngannou has actually thrown in the UFC. Usually it's 2 punches, almost always 2, rarely just 1, but rarely more than 2. 1-1-2.
Pretty sure the Rosenstrike KO.
Wow, I hesitate to call that a combination. I would call it a pile of punches. So there was a nice 1-1-2. I think that was probably one of the smarter instances of Ngannou closing the distance behind a threat, not off balancing himself. And then the knockdown early in round 2 was like a throwaway right to like a shifting left cross, which was also pretty slick. I can see both of those kinds of attacks being very effective in spots against Gane, who, again, does not tend to make his otherwise very effective, efficient boxing a threat when he's retreating. Notably, that jab, he tends to just kind of scurry, as most MMA fighters do, and certainly most heavyweights, although admittedly with a great deal more agility than the average heavyweight. Even like Junior Dos Santos was able to not only clip him on the counter a couple times, again with counter left hooks, but was at times able to kind of throw Gane back against the fence and put him in a couple scary spots with combination attacks. So if Ngannou, being faster and more considered, can make those moments happen, he still has the ultimate advantage over Gane of really only needing to be effective in spots. For Gane, it has to be consistent. It's unlikely he's going to sleep Ngannou. Any lack of consistency can only be gotten away with by Cyril Gane if, as I think we both are at least partially suspecting, he manages to like shut Ngannou down and make him overthink everything and just drop his volume to 0, which could happen. Huh? So how does he do that? For me, it's the jab is great. The teep, Gane has a fantastic teep. I think the really big thing, because I agree with you that largely Ngannou is most effective on the counter, is that Gane is probably the best feinter in the heavyweight division. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and say it. He is the best feinter in the heavyweight division. He's got really tricky timing. He is constantly threatening things even when he isn't engaging, which is one of the classic cures to counter-punching woes. That stands to be one of the more effective aspects of his game here in making Ngannou hesitate and second-guess his countering opportunities. So if he does manage to shut Ngannou out of a more active pace, I think those feints are going to be super pivotal.
For Ngannou, I think the important things are he needs to make sure that he is inside his reach.
Yeah,
I think that's the most important thing about probably anyone fighting Gane.
Sure,
is that he cannot sit on the outside and wait for something to come, because he'll just be biting on jab feints the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned. I'll be interested to see if Ngannou goes for low kicks.
That I was going to bring up myself. Yeah,
I think Gane is actually quite good at dealing with them, in part because he makes difficult to tell when he's sitting down on his lead hand. So, Rosenstrike tried it a few times, but without a whole lot of success.
JDS nailed him with a couple really good ones. Volkov landed lots of slapping ones. They weren't particularly effective, though.
I also think, I do think Ngannou, as someone who has, we've talked about as a bit of a prodigy who's able to learn new things, I do think he would be well advised to level change in this fight.
Ben Cohn was talking about that on Twitter earlier.
Yeah, I mean, for, multiple and sort of obvious reasons. One, he can clinch up with Gane, where he's almost certainly stronger than him.
Right.
Wouldn't even necessarily do it with the hope that you're going to get a takedown. I mean,
Sure.
If he does, it would be fantastically helpful, but he'll just make him drop the hands and get him into tie-ups.
It's something to make Gane.
And as we've mentioned in many occasions, Ngannou is a tactile fighter. Once he has his hands on his opponent, he knows exactly where they are.
Certainly.
Gives him a good chance, even if he doesn't get any kind of takedown off it, to nail Gane on the clinch break.
Yeah, there was the 1-1-2 was the first exchange against Miocic, but really the first big turning point was when he stuffed a takedown and then took Miocic's back and then just rained hooks down from behind him. And had him shook for the rest of the fight as a result, because they were devastatingly hard punches from such a close distance in a often kind of awkward position. Didn't look awkward coming from him. Yeah, I tend to agree. I don't think it will be a bad idea. I mean, there is the problem that Ngannou has to worry about energy expenditure in a way that Gane just doesn't. I mean, we don't necessarily know how Gane holds up if he's put into that kind of fight. You would assume that his energy is going to drain a lot faster, Giga Chikadze style, if you force him to defend wrestling attacks, or just have success with them. No one has really managed to do it. But even so, that could be a gamble for Ngannou. Especially if he's not doing damage, if he's not taking advantage of that special ability he has to just find your chin once he's laid a hand on you, then I don't know if it'll have to be well chosen. And I think I would agree ultimately that the goal should not really be necessarily to take Gane down. He should use the takedowns much in the way Gane tends to use them. Opportunistic attacks that give Cyril something to think about, that make him more hesitant in putting out his consistent volume and giving. Oh
man, imagine if Gane goes for one of his takedowns and just gets destroyed off it.
I think that would be a terrible idea, but it's not impossible.
He does it against almost everyone.
Yeah, he does. This will be one where he goes.
Really not. It's not incredibly unlikely.
He goes for a sloppy shot after whiffing on a right hand, as a slightly panicked response to ending up out of position, which is something we have to talk about. Gane looks so great with the jab, so great with the kicks. He is exceptionally good by heavyweight standards in that first layer. Hard to hit, hard to read, great at closing the distance and getting back out. Exchanging past the jab or past the single kick, even just after the kick sometimes, he can get really lazy and sloppy. He'll duck, he'll take his eyes off his opponent, he'll flail, and he will fall into sloppy shots, which are often just effective as a tactic. But if Ngannou sprawls out Cyril Gane the way he did to Miocic in their rematch, that could be a death sentence. That does not sound like a good place to end up underneath Francis Ngannou's sprawl as someone who is not nearly as good a wrestler as Miocic. So, I don't know. I think even the problem for Gane here that I can't get past is Ngannou seems like an opponent who just can't be shut out of the equation in the way that Gane's previous opponents have.
He can be.
Well, he's still going to be a level of threat. Whether or not he's able to execute, if that Derek Lewis fight is predictive, and it may very well be, But he is the one who can change everything with a single strike. I do not think Gane has that ability in this matchup. Not nearly to the same degree anyway. It would have to be a pretty fortunate shot.
Agree.
So yeah, I don't know. I'm expecting Ngannou to insist on pressure early. I think Gane is definitely going to have success with that jab. But when he kicks and when he goes beyond the jab, when he throws his right hand or anything, other fighters have managed to catch him on the counter before and make him panic at least a little bit. Even Junior Dos Santos, as I said, a worse version, I think, of Junior than the one Ngannou fought. If you watch those two fights, I think he's noticeably slower and more hesitant against Gane. And also a fighter who, on the lead, only throws one punch at a time in that entire fight. He still manages to clip Gane with a counter left hook, very much like the one Ngannou dropped Miocic with for the KO. And while Gane is super good at disguising his entries and throwing opponents, breaking opponents' rhythm with well-timed jabs and feints that they have to guess between, he's not defensively sound in the pocket. And Ngannou, even when you are hitting him, still has a hair trigger on the counter like Gane has never faced. So I don't know. I'm going to pick Francis Ngannou here.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yes, Gane is going to have to be very, very consistent, and perhaps even more so than we've seen in the past.
Yeah.
There are a few sort of X factors I'll chuck out there.
Please.
Obviously, Ngannou's first title defense, one with more pressure put on it than most.
Yeah.
He's been publicly feuding with the UFC,
right,
over very rightfully wanting more pay, and I think they would very much like him to lose this fight, to be honest.
Yes, he said he will not fight again under his current contract after this.
Mm-hmm. And if there's basically the UFC more so than almost at any point in its history, just wants compliance from its fighters. It does not want people pushing back in that kind of way. So he's really betting on himself, and I think you can never quite tell how that's gonna pan out.
We've seen him overcommit on both sides of the confidence spectrum before. One resulted in his only lopsided loss. The other resulted in the worst fight he's ever had. Or arguably the worst fight
some people, it's hard to figure out how people gonna change in response to those kind of pressures. I think Davison Figuerado, who we'll be talking about later, I think his first title fight, I was genuinely shocked because everyone tends to kind of close up shop once they've become a title a belt holder. Everyone moves to a more defensive style. He actually really stepped on the aggression for his first fight against Brandon Moreno, and then somehow looked dreadful in the second one. And
there was that fight with Alex Perez, which he got done in less than 2 minutes. That was a title defense as well.
So, very difficult to tell how people can look, but I do think that, it proves Ngannou to be aggressive in this fight. He cannot on the back foot.
No.
And the last X factor is obviously that they've trained before. Not necessarily one where I think you can draw anything from this, because you can be, in these kind of situations, you can be like, who's the more technical fighter and so on. And will that necessarily translate to one person just having the other guy's number? I think that's not necessarily always the case, but it does tell people what the dynamic is and how they should address it. Like the classic example being Tyron Woodley, Robbie Lawler.
Sure.
in that Woodley had sparred with Lawler enough that he knew, I can't strike with this guy for very long.
Yep.
And one of the most, uncharacteristically aggressive performances of his entire career.
It was enough valuable intel for an infamously cautious fighter to gamble in round one.
So, I mean, I think for those two X factors, my broad guesses would be that they actually push in opposite directions. I think Ngannou is going to want to be cautious because he really wants to hold on to his belt.
Mm-hmm.
He's also probably going to know that he cannot have a sparring match with Cyril Gane.
Sure. How do you even spar with Ngannou? Like it must be that it's either Miocic or Derek Lewis, right? Like he must either have to turn it off so much that nothing happens, or he's murdering every sparring partner they put in against him.
Yeah.
By accident.
Yeah. I am going to pick Gane, though.
Mm-hmm.
I think, as I kind of said I would after the Volkov fight, I think he is just something that in some ways the heavyweight division isn't really for, particularly at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
You can be, and I do think that in some ways, calling back to Ngannou's, the whole thing about Ngannou's chin, I do think that Howard does somewhat get overrated in the heavyweight division as being like, as being like a difference maker. It's kind of everyone hits incredibly hard.
Pretty much.
And I do feel like if Gane can find a way to just sit on the end of his jab, he can actually like force a more a dangerously thoughtful fight out of Ngannou. I mean, you can get. I think the main thing I think that strikes me is that people get too caught up in the idea that like he's just got like a death touch, and you just die instantly when he punches you. Like if that was the case and people could do that, then Wilder just would have knocked out Tyson Fury.
Yeah.
And it's sort of not the inarguably more advanced heavyweight sport of heavyweight boxing hasn't been overrun by the David Tours and the Wilders and so on.
Sure. They've always had a place, but
they've always had a place, but it hasn't necessarily been at the top.
Right.
Because in the end, like getting jabbed by a heavyweight is still a pretty bad thing to happen to you.
Yeah.
Not as bad, but the calculus is still sort of on the other side. That being said, it's really a 50-50 fight.
I agree. And the thing Ngannou has going for him that a lot of those heavyweight boxing like archetype fitters don't. He's certainly not a lot of those guys fall into that style and end up being glass cannons. Your Ernie Shavers, certainly to an extent, your Deontay Wilders. These are guys who they have to scare you off with their power or they won't survive.
Yes.
And again, Ngannou appears to be incredibly durable. And
I think that for me, I think is the real crux of it.
Yeah.
That's what makes it so incredibly hard to call, is that he can just shuck damage off.
Yeah. And if he has even if he's shut out of the fight for long stretches and has even the very limited rallies that say Alexander Volkov had against Gane, again, they could be tremendously more effective when he has those moments. Eating round 4, Gane is comfortably in control. Volkov has one of his sparing moments of fuck it, I'm going to get hit, let's trade. Lands a counter uppercut. Chases Gane back out of the pocket, lands a 1-2. These are punches that I agree with you that you don't just count everything on the Ngannou death touch, but he is a very powerful heavyweight. Even when his gas has run out, we have seen He just has, even without the explosiveness, he has heavy hands in addition to that athleticism. So, yeah.
It's a genuinely fascinating one.
It's fascinating. Yeah. It could be bad.
It could. You know what? Oh, I was thinking about this. It could actually be really good.
It could. I hope it is.
This could actually be like a genuinely. There's obviously like ways in which it could be. You could resurrect Garn Rosenstruik or whatever.
Yeah.
But I think it could actually also be like there's a non-zero chance this is actually a genuinely really good fight.
An all-time heavyweight classic. I really hope so. It's such a style
if
clash.
if Garn has its success and then Garnu chases him out and stuns him, we could get a real back and forth fight. Because the other thing we haven't seen from Garn seems pretty durable, but we haven't seen him pushed deep into a fight.
Yep.
We don't know what he's got to offer there, but I think there's a genuinely I don't necessarily want to jinx it, but there's a genuine chance we could get something really good out of this.
I agree. I like. If we get if we get 50% of the heavyweight equivalent of like Font Aldo, that would rule. I would be so very happy for that. And I'd be perfectly happy if you're correct and Gon wins. Again, major shift for like what a UFC heavyweight champion can look like. He is, again, in so many ways, despite all the asterisks, all the parenthetical for a heavyweights, he is a one-of-a-kind heavyweight contender. And likewise, Francis Ngannou has made himself a nemesis of Dana White in the UFC. So I would very much like to see him win as well and have them over a barrel. That would be great. And all I really hope for is that it's a good fight, and I don't disagree. I think there's a good chance. We're jinxing it right now, Phil, but
yeah.
Let's go.
Send your complaints.
Let's go good heavyweights. Hey, the last several times we've split on an interesting fight, it seems to have resulted in a brutal war. I think we split on Aldo Font. I think we maybe split on Sandhagen Jan. We split on Kattar Chikadze. This is the heavy hands blessing.
Sweet.
All right, let's take a break then. We spent a long time on that fight, but it is certainly more deserving than pretty much anything else. After this, Brandon Moreno versus Davison Figuerado 3, and then Calvin Kattar versus Giga Chikadze. All of that, and that's it. After this.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
Okay, welcome back to Heavy Hands. Let's talk about this UFC 270 co-main event. Brandon Moreno versus Davison Figueiredo 3. I just said before we started, Phil, I think there's comparatively less to say here. Just because there are both more and fewer questions. More of the wrong kind of questions, fewer of the right kind of questions. Maybe it's difficult to tell which is the right and which is the wrong. Because if I'm not asking the wrong questions, then this could indeed be... I don't know what I'm saying. What I'm saying is it could be a great fight. Their first fight was amazing. And I think Brandon Moreno built on that and had a stupendous second performance, but it is impossible to look at that second fight and compare it to the first and not think, this is not the same Davison Figueiredo. Something's off. He's not confident. He's either trying to be capital T technical, or something's going on in his personal life, or who knows. But it certainly doesn't make this a simple fight to just really get amped up for, as you might have expected thinking of future rematches after that first fight.
Yeah. After the first fight, we were like, there's a lot of areas to improve on for both of these guys.
Yeah.
And it really looked like the person who could put their stamp on the fight after the first one was Figuerado.
Yeah.
Because all he had to do was just lean on his jab more, work his kicks more, and other than that, could just sort of cruise on his disgusting power advantage.
Yep.
The main difference between those two fights is just the directionality of it. Like, Figuerado is on the back foot the entire time in the second fight.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much. Like he's just looking for counters. You just find yourself thinking, why would you be doing that?
Why?
About the last fight led you to believe that this was the way to go about it.
Yeah.
And as I said before, I did remember him talking about Kamaru Usman, being like, wow, that's a guy who I really want to emulate. I want to be like him.
Yeah.
And be technical, and just thinking, no. And that was before this, before the second fight happened. It was just like a real obvious like red flag where I was just like, oh, don't do that. But also I was confident he would not in fact try and do that because he was Davison Figuerado.
Yeah. What was it?
And a lunatic.
There was a Romero related. I bring this up largely because he is famously flyweight Romero. Was it? There was a moment in Romero's career where he it was somebody else looking at Romero, and they were like, "Oh, you don't have to go out there and have a war. That guy just like bides his time and gets a knockout in round 3 every other fight." It was like, I can't remember who it was, but it's like that's the kind of lesson Figueiredo seems to have taken. Do you think that's it? Like, do we know enough? Did we see enough to guess that this was Figueiredo becoming capital T technical?
I mean, seeing as he literally said he didn't want to be in crazy wars and wanted to be like Kamaru Usman and take no damage, I am willing to say that, yes.
It was so dramatic, though.
Yeah.
And like normally,
it was like, that's the thing. I was like, even if he wants to do this, I don't think he can. And then he kind of did, and it was terrible.
Yeah, I mean, even when that happens, there's a reason we've now invented we've just invested more and more thought into an official terminology for this kind of turn that MMA strikers seem to undergo. Like, say, Colby Covington against Kamaru Usman. He tried to be capital T technical. What happened? It didn't work, and he had to become Colby Covington again. That's the thing. Davison Figueiredo didn't look at any point like he was even really trying to turn it back on. So I have to think like there had to have been something else going on.
I think it is also that he tried being a bit more like he tried being a bit more aggressive and then just got immediately like.
True, he got dropped with a jab.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Immediately put on his ass.
But I have to wonder if, like, this is an absolute stab in the dark. I would never say that this is an accurate guess. But, like, for example, does Figueiredo go to the doctor and get, like, a brain scan that's like, oh, you have early signs of CTE? Like, there has to be something. It's like in a story, It would be he meets an old fighter at the gym whose brains are just scrambled eggs. Like, there has to be some emotional thing going on there to create such a dramatic change, especially given that it was so successful in their first fight. I know it was competitive throughout, but it was a very clear Davison Figueiredo win. There's really no way to give that fight to Brandon Moreno.
That's with the point deduction.
Right. Yeah, right. Even with that, there's just no way. You can maybe
find a draw, but even then, I don't think it's even a draw.
It's pretty much 3 ironclad rounds for Figueiredo. Which is, as we've said before, that's enough just in a statistical sense to pretty much ensure that one guy's probably going to win the decision. So I don't know. There has to be something. I think you may be right that like he did try to turn it around, and I don't want to take credit away from Moreno. There's always this balance you have to strike when one guy shows up better than ever, but it in part looks better than ever because the other guy just isn't there. I think you're onto something that like Figueiredo did make a sort of vain effort to get more violent and just got instantly countered and put on his ass, which is something that has never happened before.
Mm-hmm.
Like, has he may have been flash knocked down once.
I don't even remember that.
I think maybe, let me look at
Did Moreno knock him down at some point?
I don't think Moreno did at all. I think maybe, I'm looking at his record to see if anything stirs a memory.
The other person I could think of who might have done it was Pantoja, but I don't remember either of them getting knocked down in that fight.
It could be Pantoja. It might be like Jared Brooks. I think someone surprisingly just caught him off balance and dropped him. But pretty much, the man is famously durable. And that might just explain it, that he tried to be technical, he realized it wasn't working, and then just did not get to turn it around. It's sort of a, like, just interrupted momentum shift. Because Moreno has a really, truly a great counter jab. He's one of the, ever since his fight with Kattar France, I think he has been one of the best boxers in MMA in terms of the varied utility of his jab. That it is a weapon in its own right, it is a measuring stick, it's a distraction, and it's a defensive tool. It is his first go-to counter when people start to crowd him, and there's a reason that I'm constantly just like losing friends and making people angry because I won't stop talking about the jab. All the annoying old boxing heads are right. It all begins with the jab. It's everything. It protects your center line. It opens the other guy's center line. It sets up your other strikes. It's safer and more efficient than anything else you can throw, and it is vital as a defensive weapon. And so credit to Moreno for using it in all those varied ways. And it led to a pivotal moment in that rematch. But because of all that, I truly do not know what we see out of Figueiredo in this rubber match.
Mm-hmm.
Which makes it kind of hard to discuss.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. If he comes back and simply looks like he did in the first fight, I think we have a very close fight.
Yeah.
But if he comes back and looks, obviously, anything like that second fight, he's just gonna get torched again.
Yeah.
Because I thought Moreno, as you said, like Moreno looked great. He worked his jab a lot. He did sort of most of the things that we said that he should, in that he needed to come forward.
Mm-hmm.
Admittedly, Figueiredo sort of let him, but that's what he did. He came forward, he used combinations off the jab. He was rarely one and done. He used combinations off chain. He changed his levels a lot with his punching combinations, which was another area where he had a lot of success in the first fight. He basically did most of the things you would want him to.
Yeah.
It was like, he improved on his areas of success, and Figueiredo just took his areas of success away.
Yeah. And again, I think it's another split thing where part of Figueiredo's reaction is likely to do with Moreno's adjustments. Mm-hmm. And Moreno, as does often happen, being the loser of the first fight, I think maybe had more concrete ideas of what to do differently. He was not like experimenting blindly in the way that Figueiredo may have been. He was basing his performance in that rematch off of what did and did not work the first time around. Very, very importantly is that even without just coming forward, it was clear from the get-go that he was going to stand his ground.
Yes.
And oftentimes, this is a thing that I don't know, I think is maybe hard to understand sometimes, or easy to forget with when you're not in the cage or the ring doing the fighting. But the space between fighters, for experienced fighters, it has a pressure of its own. You know what the danger zone is. And when you feel that you can move forward and the other guy respects that bubble of danger, it encourages you to move forward more. And sometimes if you don't get that sign, if the other guy is just like, all right, walk into my space, I'm going to jab you, you don't come forward, and in fact, you quickly end up being the one who's retreating. Yep. So I think that definitely did happen to an extent. Whatever adjustments Figueiredo had game planned for in the moment, I think he genuinely found it harder to just start backing Moreno up, which he did quite easily for almost the entirety of their first fight.
Mm-hmm. I mean, so that's something we've long said about Figueiredo, is that he really is a different fighter when the opponent is on the retreat.
Yeah,
because he's sort of, and you know, we can certainly see that second fight described in those terms, because you can see Figueiredo being low volume counter striker. Figueiredo, she often kind of is in neutral space. But when he's always come alive as a fighter is when his opponent has his back to the fence.
Yes.
He's really good at picking people off when they're moving. You know, he has better shot selection. He's more aggressive. He's good at like hitting people with looping body shots and like the Benavidez KO or anything like this.
Right.
He's good at driving people around the cage. And once, perhaps a lot of the dynamic can be argued as simply being Moreno saying, "I'm not going to get my back put to the cage," and then Figueiredo being like shockingly more limited when that's not the case.
Sure,
that
especially
could be a
if
big
you
part
have
of the dynamic.
As intelligent a leading game as Moreno has developed over these last 3 or 4 fights. Again, it all comes behind the jab and the feints, and everything plays off of that like very direct, safe, efficient center line threat. I mean, I'm watching their rematch right now, and the contrast is pretty sharp. Like,
yeah.
Moreno just doesn't back up. It's really that simple. He gets out into the middle of the cage right away, and even without having to advance, he sort of lets Figueiredo come to him and then just starts threatening him with the jab. And after that, he's mostly coming forward. And I think that may be part of it. Figueiredo has always been willing to counter, and against less sophisticated leading strikers, less people who lose their feet when they come forward or don't lead with their jab or don't know how to disguise or vary their attacks, like Pantoja or Benavidez, guys who get by on raw aggression, as Figueiredo himself does to an extent. These guys he can time and counter and hurt them and get momentum back in his favor. That's not as easy against Moreno. Again, even though Kattar France in like the earliest iteration of New Moreno, he had plenty of success with counters. He still spent the entire fight on the end of Moreno's jab. And maybe that's just it. Is that Figueiredo he has definitely always been a fighter who thrives. His confidence blooms the moment he sees his opponent like fearing that pocket in front of him. And he just starts more and more as the fight goes on. He will just run after you. Frankly, getting like often creatively and brilliantly, but just recklessly violent. Which again, I think if he gets off on the right foot, he could probably still afford to do in a lot of spots against Moreno. He hits super hard. Aside from getting dropped the moment he tried to charge in, it is still, I think, the only time I can really recall him being knocked down. So if he's anything like first fight Figueiredo, I think it still stands to be a very close fight. But he just may not get the chance if Moreno remains determined to just hold his ground and make his own sort of bubble constantly threatening, which is exactly what he did in the rematch. So yeah. I think directionality was the thing we hit on after the first fight, and it
was the thing we hit on, I think, before the first fight.
Sure, yeah, and it was
Figueiredo approached that like fantastically, much even like more so than I expected him to. He was just like, no, get back into the cage.
Yeah,
he just fought the entire fight at his optimal distance.
Yeah,
and with his optimal positioning.
So the big question is really like, can Figueiredo put Moreno in a position where he actually has to back up now that Moreno appears to have figured out that it's important for him not to? Because I think in the first fight, he understandably was just like, I don't want to stand in the pocket with this dude. I have to maintain distance. He still did that in the second fight, but he maintained it assertively. Then I guess that's the big question. Can Figueiredo force Moreno to back up, given that he no longer seems to think that he has to?
Yeah. I mean, I think, he needs to come forward and he needs to jab with Moreno. If he does neither of these things, I think he's just going to get smoked again.
Yeah. Well, now he's got the benefit of having been, wiped out. Maybe it gives him some more specific things to learn from. If Figueiredo comes in with a jab-heavy pressure game, that would be good. Because I know Moreno is up to competing with it. No matter how good Figueiredo's adjustments are, Brandon Moreno is going to scrap with him. And if it's a battle where both guys are determined to come forward, like, best possible scenario, we're looking at like flyweight Hendricks Lawler 1. Just like, this is the distance we're fighting at. Neither of us wants to back up. Let's fucking go. Could be great.
Let's hope for it. Let's hope something hasn't happened to Figueiredo.
Yeah.
The weight cuts aren't getting to him.
Yeah, could be.
It's just it was just like a single disastrous choice.
Yeah.
But yeah, as for you just kind of have to pick Moreno. There's not.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a reason to pick Figueiredo to turn it around.
Which it is like the kind of utterly blind flip-flop.
that often happens.
Yeah. And always, well, at least much of the time results in just another complete miss. This may be one of those series where I don't know. Did I pick Figueiredo the first time? I don't remember. I certainly picked him in the rematch.
Yeah.
Okay. So maybe this will be one of my most accurate fight series so far, where I only get one of the three wrong. Probably not. Probably not, though. But yeah, I agree. Like, Moreno knew what he needed to do in the rematch. In the absence of knowing for certain what was going on with Figueiredo, you still have to give Moreno a ton of credit. And it's the only concrete way to explain why he was so effective there. He just did not give ground. And that's, we knew it would work, and it did. It worked tremendously well, whatever else was happening. So I'm going to guess that it will work again. That's it. Okay. Well, with that, why don't we take one final break? When we come back, Phil, the moment you've been waiting for. He's licking his chops already.
Yeah.
Kattar, Chikadze, Giga got absolutely fucked. And I'm going to let Phil take the lead and explain how beautiful it all was right after this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
Okay, welcome back to Heavy Hands. Phil, as promised, now is your moment of glory. Gloat away, my friend. You have, while doing very little, you have nonetheless somehow earned it.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't based on analysis. Wasn't based on insight. Just pure unbridled haterism. It's so good when it pays off. Yes. And it was nice to see that Chikadze had that fight where I guess he did actually prove a lot of things to a lot of doubters, where given the direction and how that fight was going, there were many opportunities for him to look for a way out.
Oh yeah.
Just stop throwing and just curl up against the cage. And to his credit, he kept fighting back.
In the absence of all else, it was a gritty goddamn fight. At no point until the last maybe 8 minutes was it really altogether easy for Calvin Kattar.
Yeah, like right towards the end, you were just like,
yeah,
oh no, he's about to get finished.
Yeah, and probably this is one of those fights where it should be stopped by the corner or somebody.
Yeah. Yeah, so he had that kind of where he really proved that whatever else he is a gritty fighter. And, you know, people could have been like, well, you know, maybe he wasn't the elite striker that we thought. He wasn't, you know, the elite unstoppable striker that we thought was going to take the division by storm. But, you know, he's proved that he's a tough out, that anyone and, you know, he'll never give up. And, you know, maybe I'll become a fan of him. I mean, other people I wouldn't have thought this, but other people might have. And, you know, obviously he opened his mouth and everyone was like, oh, yeah, I see why you hate this guy, Phil.
Yeah. 9 times out of 10.
Yeah, I would have won that fight 9 times out of 10, which, as many people have pointed out, is really one of those things where it was like, you say that when you get fluke KO'd.
Yeah. You kind of lost it.
Edson Barboza could have said that to you,
yeah.
Giga Chikadze, and people would have been like, you know what? Kind of were losing that fight when you knocked him out of nowhere.
Yeah, you would have won it 9 times out of 10, but in the most charitable interpretation, you lost it 3 rounds out of 5. The most charitable. Yes. So, I don't know. Doesn't seem to hold a lot of water.
How would you have done it? Would you have knocked Calvin Kattar out?
Obviously.
Which is doable, which can be done by people.
Yeah. So this is one of a few reasons that this is one of those picks where I'm completely happy to be wrong. In large part, my pick was, I suppose, a sort of sadness hedge, thinking that Calvin Kattar can't possibly be the same after that fight with Max Holloway. Now, I think it's an open question. What? In fact, I'm kind of willing to at least mitigate what I said last week and many times before about Calvin Kattar just outright deteriorating as a boxer. I think this fight is a real indication that a lot of his game is situational and opponent specific. Because there were definitely moments here where it's like, oh, this is Calvin Kattar. There's the triple jab. Hey, especially when it started to get comfortable, he looked quite a lot like classic Calvin Kattar. But whatever lessons he may have taken, if any, away from Max Holloway, one is clear. He decided that he could not be killed. And that was the energy he carried into this fight. He was like, well, Max Holloway couldn't do it, so you try it, bitch. And he was utterly fearless. You can question some of his tactical choices, which I'm sure we will. You know, and you can look at him as like a physical specimen and still come away with a somewhat unfavorable comparison in some respects next to a guy like Chikadze. He certainly looked a lot slower to me for at least the first 8 minutes until Chikadze was really gassing. But he knew that he should not give space to a mobile kicker. And he determined before the fight, pretty clearly, I think, he was going to stay in Chikadze's face no matter what. And it absolutely paid off. It was not only a sensationally exciting fight, even when it took that, you know, mid-fight turn into complete and utter beatdown, but just like that, it was a courageous performance from Calvin Kattar. He was in no way diminished in any immediate way by that Max Holloway fight that I could see. In fact, if anything, he looked like more confident than ever that he could brawl with anyone.
Yes.
So yeah, what was Chikadze going to do? Right? Like, even a diminished Calvin Kattar, like his chin, you have to assume as his opponent that it's going to be there, right? It's been incredible throughout his entire career. So you're just going to KO him flat? I guess?
Yeah, that was the calculus. I mean, everyone knew that Chikadze was favored early and Kattar would be favored late.
Yeah.
And just like even the commentary team was calling this out a bit. Like, just the mechanics of how they throw things have dictated that would be the case.
Yeah. Oh, that's the other thing, by the way.
Keita being leg kickable because he's planted is, certainly a thing which is true, but it's also meaning that he's not constantly throwing himself at the opponent.
Yes.
And
that's the other reason I found this result very satisfying, Phil. Finally, the reason that I first had a resentment against Chikadze, that he's just not as good a technician as I wanted or expected him to be, he paid for it. He's a terribly inefficient boxer. We've said it really since the first times we started talking about him on this show, and he paid for it here. You can't be that bad in the pocket. You can't get by on instincts but sloppy technique for 5 rounds against Calvin Kattar.
Yeah. So one thing happened in this fight which thought about it, and I was like, oh yeah, that does make sense. Which is that Giga Chikadze is really durable.
Sure.
Like, he took a hell of a shot. Like, it wasn't just, he was actually he was actually mentally tough, which he was. There were lots of moments where he had the kind of Barboza moment where he would just sling the hardest shot he could back at Kattar, and you could sort of see it on his face where he was like, "How's that?"
Yeah.
And Kattar just went back to doing what he was doing and
Yep.
elbow him in the face a couple of times.
Couple of dozen times.
But also, I found myself thinking is that, of course Chikadze is durable, because if he wasn't, he would have got, accidentally KO'd by a sparring partner at some point.
Because his mechanics are terrible.
It wouldn't have, it wouldn't have had to be he was just like a regularly durable guy. He wouldn't have to be countered. He wouldn't have to be countered by a power puncher who was going for it.
Yeah.
He would just have to spring forward to punch, with his weight out over in front of his feet, doing that thing where he just, he fell over multiple times in this fight.
Yeah.
Or, went stumbling past Kattar.
He repeatedly allowed Kattar to completely break his posture with one hand. He would fall headfirst into the pocket past his feet, and Kattar at one point just reached out and held his head down and followed him. He tried to retreat, and Kattar just wouldn't let go of the back of his head, and Chikadze was unable to stand back up because that's how much he compromises his stance when he enters the pocket.
Yeah, and I was just you would have learned not to do this because you just would have got you would have got knocked out by a not very good fighter at some point, possibly more than one point.
Yeah, I mean that's
he has to be insanely durable, otherwise he just wouldn't have learned to do this.
Which is an ingredient to the classic example of this this recipe, Anthony Pettis.
Yes,
who is also incredibly durable and remains remarkably durable to this day, and would have either gotten better or retired if he had not been so.
Even Pettis, to be fair to Pettis, has a well-trained one too.
Yes.
Pettis, Pettis has his ring craft and his footwork and so on might be all over the place, but his punching form is not to be criticized.
True. More like Kattar. He can punch many, many times and not fall over once.
Yes. That's surprisingly a surprisingly rare thing.
Yes. So yeah. Oh,
yeah, I mean, constantly springing at Kattar. Had multiple issues. I'm glad that you did call out Kattar landing the counter uppercut, which as Chikadze falls into the pocket, which did happen on several occasions.
Yeah, man, there was a beautiful one in round 2. There was so I'll say this just to sprinkle it in for the controversy, I guess. Though, I think there's a perfectly valid argument to give Chikadze either of the first 2 rounds. They're not clear. Right. Round 1, the majority of the time is spent grappling, and he's losing.
Yes.
Albeit while absorbing practically 0 damage and having done quite a lot of damage in a short, minute and 15 seconds at the beginning of the round. I think
I gave that round to Chikadze.
I think that's perfectly fair. I think I did live as well. Round 2, he also has, I think, the majority of success in the exchanges. Most of the round, he is, being pressured, looking visibly uncomfortable and increasingly haggard. But he is continuously beating Kattar to the punch. There's one sequence, I'm working on an article about this. God knows if it'll ever see the light of day, but there's one sequence that I will be using as an example where, like right around the 3-minute mark, with 3 minutes left on the clock in round 2, Chikadze is like, he does like his best impression of a good boxer. He's like moving around on the outside and pivoting off his jab, at least as best he can. And it's working pretty well. Like, he's got super quick hands. He's very accurate. And he is, even when he's having to trade, he is at least trading jabs with Kattar and frequently beating him to the punch. And then his energy bar depletes a little more, and Kattar has had just a little more time to start to get a read on his speed and timing, and he starts like pulling and slipping the jab or parrying it. And Chikadze just instantly starts, on jabs, almost falling over. Like there's a turn, maybe, I don't know, at the 4 minutes into the round, where like 2 or 3 times in pretty quick succession, Chikadze overextends on a jab that does not connect, and because of that, he has to scramble wildly to recover his balance. And even then, Kattar tries to, he almost falls over. He does some desperate, I can't actually see my opponent ducking because he doesn't know what's coming next, but he wants to get out of the way. This is a classic Chikadze, good idea, awful technique kind of thing. And even then, as Kattar tries to pile in with a 1-2 and chase this now formless, exhausted fighter out of the pocket, Chikadze manages to like backwards shift, get out of the way of the 1-2, and crack Kattar with like an improvised right hook on the exit. So like he has a lot of tactical success in round 2. Problem is he then scurries away, and guess who is standing right in front of him, and his back is very near the cage. Like strategically, Kattar just won't go away, and Chikadze can't afford these exchanges. You're supposed to get scared off. You're supposed to give him some margin for error to get away with his frankly sloppy boxing technique. And it just didn't happen. Kattar just would not give him the space he needed, did not respect his power or speed. And increasingly, as Chikadze slowed down, was able to anticipate and land more slip counters than I have seen from Kattar in some time. Slipped into uppercuts, same time counters with right hands and elbows. I would have loved to see Kattar throw about 10 times more body shots, but he landed some really pretty ones off of right hand and right elbow counters. He did like the cross elbow counter into the left hook to the liver. That was beautiful. There were a couple.
I think it's because Chikadze's head was so there.
Yeah,
just couldn't get it out of his mind.
Yeah,
he was just like, this is just always there to be punched.
Yeah, because even when he was beating Kattar to the punch, he was perilously close to being countered, and the only way Chikadze knows to get his head back out of that position is to bodily haul all of that overcommitted weight backwards. It's just constant. It's the striking equivalent of a nonstop grappling scramble. And
yes,
you only win though where you're just always improvising. Nothing is planned. The position is in flux, which is not what's supposed to happen when you are trying to do the neutralizing outfighter game that Chikadze was forced into here. And you only survive those kinds of grappling matches. You only come out on top when you're in control of the scrambles, when you're initiating them or you're one step ahead. Otherwise, you're just, the opponent is making you scramble. And you're kind of, freaking out. As brave as Chikadze.
You end up with the equivalent of like Shields Maya, where Shields is just collecting like low percentage or high percentage but low reward positions.
Yeah.
And Maya is scrambling out of everything, and just Shields is just steadily chipping away.
Yes. Yeah. And that's what was happening. Chikadze was remarkably effective in this scrambling striking battle. But it was a still impressively long series, but a series nonetheless of Pyrrhic victories at best. Each one just taking a chunk out of his own stamina. There's no way, if Kattar comes into the fight that durable and with that game plan, that this version of Chikadze beats him with anything close to 90% consistency. So I don't want to hold that against Giga too much. I'm sure it's like a one-off quote, and it very likely does not really represent what he thinks about the fight so much as this is the image he wants to project. For all I know, Chikadze will come out of this being like, that was a hard lesson. I actually have to work on some things. But it wasn't the fight he described. That's all there is to it.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard some people saying that, like, you know, he showed how gritty he was and so on, that he's going to improve a lot after this fight. I just don't. Is it mean to say? No, it's not mean. I'll take it.
Do it.
I'm allowed to. He doesn't have the style of someone who's going to improve.
Wow.
Like that, I mean, that, you know, it's a bit like Anthony Pettis.
Yeah.
Is that he was just like, part of the reason why he doesn't. I thought he could hang tough in that fight is that he's super convinced that he's really good.
Yeah.
Like, this is actually, he genuinely believes this is really good striking.
Yeah. It usually works.
Yeah.
He
just needed to land the one cleaner shot. Just needed to, you know, bet he went back there thinking, I need to throw the Giga kick more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But, you know, that is the other thing, is that, like, he's really managed to his kicks, leave his kicks at home, like, for this fight. He really managed to, like, seal
pretty much
Chikadze's kicks by just staying on top of him.
Yep, he just didn't give him space to kick.
Just, you know, not a particularly great look for you if you're kicking Chikadze.
No, it's
Calvin
not.
Kattar.
That's kind of the thing you do best and the thing Kattar does worst. In fact, I looked up, I compiled some statistics for that article that I'm struggling my way through. Kattar absorbs 86% of the low kicks attempted against him. That's overall coming into this fight. In straight numbers, that amounts to, let me see. In his UFC career, people have thrown up before this fight, people have thrown 246 low kicks at him. He's eaten 211.
Jesus.
Now, to his credit, Giga Chikadze landed at right around an 80% clip. But Phil, can you tell me, what is 80% of 9? Because that's the number. It's about 7. He landed 7 of 9 low kicks. That's how many he managed to get off. That is, I mean, frankly, not something totally unexpected. I think, if anything, Chikadze has a much better excuse for getting distracted from an effective tactic in this fight than he ever has before. This was like Omar Morales times a billion. Like, oh, I've hurt this guy's leg, except I didn't actually manage to hurt it yet, and oh god, he's already pressuring me, I have no room to kick. But that is like the worst version of a typical Chikadze problem, is that lack of focus, the lack of depth in his game, technically, which would be necessary to consistently put himself in positions. And that's even then supposing that he's the kind of guy who can stick to a specific idea for an entire fight. He certainly can't when he's being pressured. But even ambiently, in a pretty neutral space fight, neutral directional fight, he's never been good at sticking to one tactic that is working. He always gets distracted. And a very typical Chikadze fight, and one that, again, I find very satisfying, not only because I like seeing Kattar back in form, but also because I like seeing people pay for bad technique, because at heart I'm still a joyless dork who thinks there's a proper way of doing things, and Chikadze does not do hardly anything properly except maybe the form on his kicks.
Yeah. I mean, I think really it's one of the key things is that he is just someone who just needs to leap out at people. He's a blitzer, and it's defined his approach in a way that like much less athletically gifted opponent like Renato Moicano didn't have to.
Yeah.
That Moicano was just going to be like, going to jab with Kattar, and when he tries to jab with me, I'm going to low kick him.
Yep, and then if
that's
he pressures,
going to make the space between the two of us. Whereas Chikadze was just like, I'm gonna blitz and punch. I'm gonna kick him and blitz him, but whenever that space isn't there, I have to recreate it.
Yep.
To be constantly moving backwards to build the space to kick and then leap out at him when he's not coming past it.
When faced with insistent pressure, Moicano could throw combination counters without just throwing his head into the line of fire, or go for takedowns. There is a great deal more both technical and like strategic depth to a game like Renato Moicano's than there is to Chikadze's. Chikadze is just a frighteningly effective striker. But that's there's not enough substance to his game beyond that to succeed in a fight that looks like this against such an indefatigable opponent.
Yeah.
So can we talk very briefly unless you have something else on that note?
I was gonna say, like, Chikadze, I think, has been quote unquote exposed, but thought he was all that in the first place, obviously.
Sure.
But there's obviously still fights that he can win in the UFC. Calvin Kattar represents a relatively, at least a relatively unique style matchup.
Yeah.
He's giant and super durable.
Well, I mean, it certainly suggests
other kind of stuff.
It certainly suggests that guys like Max Holloway and Alexander Volkanovski would both shred Chikadze, which I think we already would have said quite confidently, but still.
Yeah, that has gone from being like very, very high probability to being an absolute certainty.
Correct.
Yeah, so I mean, Chikadze can still win fights. He's proven that he can. He's proven that he can, he can hang.
Mm-hmm.
If not, so I think they should just match him accordingly, and maybe like Ryan Ortega, Jeremy Stevens, Billy Quarantillo, basically anyone who will do this to him again, because it was great and I enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah, I'm with you. Why not?
Maybe one fight for Jeremy Stevens to check whether his chin's still there.
That would be great.
He's getting pretty old. I don't want Chikadze to get a meme KO. I want Jeremy Stevens to entirely replicate the Yair Rodriguez fight.
Just get chewed up for 2 rounds and then win.
Yep.
Yeah, that would be good.
Well, 5 rounders only, obviously. Against insanely durable people. Or Giga Chikadze main events, says Philip McKenzie of
the notable hater
on the podcast Heavy Hands, against people who are impossible to knock out. Thank you.
Notable Chikadze nemesis, Phil McKenzie. Yeah, okay, so I want to say a couple words on Kattar. Because again, this causes me to have a bit of a revision or mitigated stance on Kattar regressing technically. Now, I do think there's something to be said for the fact that Kattar clearly came out of that Holloway fight more sure than ever before that it would take a silver bullet dipped in holy water to actually knock him out. Like, he's definitely still, I think, at some point along the puncher's path. He's gonna, it's featherweight, man. He's gonna keep having slugfests with people. But this does show that given the right kind of positions or an adequately compromised opponent, Kattar still has pretty much all the techniques and more so than he did in that fight with Shane Burgos, which still looks like the real high point of like tactical perfection of his UFC career. When Chikadze was slowed down enough, for example, and increasingly got his back put up against the fence, Kattar's jab came out. It didn't even just come out when Chikadze was already stuck in the pocket, although the more he got stuck in the pocket, the more we saw of that good, effortless Kattar jab, where he's not overcommitting, he's not stepping in and just widening his stance, making it very difficult for him to recover quickly. He is actually just touching the opponent with the jab. Even more than that, he actually at times was backing Chikadze off and actually following him out of the pocket with series of jabs. That was nice. That was something that I really feared he had lost. And I think I have to acknowledge that here against the right kind of opponent, you still see a lot of classic Kattar shit. I also noted his lacking defense, and while it certainly didn't look great in the early going, and all the same holes that Holloway exploited, like the quickness with which he can backpedal and throw up his guard and just, give a clever opponent different targets to pursue, that was still there. But a lot of slip and pull counters, which is another thing he did really well against Burgos that I kind of thought was diminishing from his game. That was, in fact, a very, very important part of the sort of early mid-fight momentum shift when he really started to turn things in his favor, was that once he was able to anticipate Chikadze's strikes, and given that Chikadze is a guy who, once he does strike, his head's going to be right there, much like Shane Burgos, all the same moves were there for Kattar, and they were very effective. That was cool. And then he also is just apparently in love with elbows now.
Yes.
So I can't really complain that much. I do think Kattar is more willing to slug it out than he was when he fought Burgos. It didn't take a lot of Burgos' pressure to make Kattar be technical and defensively minded. But to some extent, that may just be to his benefit. If he had that reaction here, who knows? Maybe Chikadze was sufficiently focused on kicking his leg that, given space, he would have kept doing it and crippled Kattar. And then with enough toughness and determination, it's clear that Kattar can still put himself into the kind of fight, the kind of range where his classic game still more or less flourishes. So I take that as a mixed bag, but overall a good sign for Calvin Kattar, noted MMA boxer.
I mean, I think it shows that I think Kattar is still a very contextually skilled fighter. I think obviously there's still matchups which are horrific for him.
Yeah.
But there's a broader range of there's still a relatively broad range of matchups that he can look very good in.
Mm-hmm. And you certainly can't question the fact that he may have eschewed, looking pretty early, but for very good reason. The ugly fight he forced Chikadze to have was why he was able to look pretty winning it later. So, well done, Calvin. Suck on that, Giga. And, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm
Sometimes when someone has a loss like this, the hate goes, and you're just like,
I forgive you.
Oh, well, he did his best. Tried. No!
You had it coming.
Chikadze, I still hate you.
You had it coming, and as we all know, when Phil McKenty says you have it coming, usually you still have it coming even after you get it. You don't even have to be an old man. You just have to be sort of weird and skinny looking. Okay, well, that'll do it. I'm sure this is quite a long episode, but Kattar Chikadze was sensational. Ngannou Gane was sensational. Somehow, much like Giga Chikadze up to this point, the UFC appears to be getting away with some very shallow, top-heavy cards because we are getting some really, really enticing and if the pattern holds, very exciting main events. So fingers crossed for next weekend. One of those fights is better be good. And otherwise, that's it. Make sure you check out the Heavy Hands Patreon. We're going to record a little extra here, I think, just to talk about the few undercard fights I think really worth visiting, both from Kattar Chikadze and the upcoming UFC 270. And also look forward to next week's episode when Kyle McLaughlin will be coming on. Fan favorite, friend of the show, Kyle McLaughlin will be coming on to talk about Ngannou gone in review, in cowardly fashion, I might add.
Yep.
You know, everyone knows the real heroes of fight analysis make stupid half-cocked predictions and then retcon everything after the fact. At least you have to swallow the shame of having gotten it wrong. Who knows who Kyle's picking? Who's going to know?
In many ways, this result, whilst being the opposite of what we predicted, actually lines up quite well with our analysis.
Oh, indeed, it actually does, yes. 9 times out of 10, I think I would have predicted it correctly. All right, so that'll do it for this week's episode. Thanks all for listening. Make sure you follow us on Twitter at Evil Greg Jackson. That's Phil. At Boxing Bush. That's me. Keep your eyes peeled. I should hope that right around the time of this episode, there will be an article up on Bloody Elbow, which is not only about Giga Chikadze, but also sort of about like why boxing and MMA is generally so weak. And why, therefore, so many fights are determined by the simple rule that the guy who comes forward wins, which more often than not is the case. And probably if I just banked on that would be a way more consistent way of predicting fights than my usual confusion. Anyway, we'll see you next week to talk about Ngannou gone and maybe talk about Hermanson Strickland. Until then, if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.